Maybe 5 years ago, one night, I was at a friend's house in the country in Vesper, Wisconsin, when my friend's car turned in and came rushing up the driveway. The car came to a halt, and two of my other friends jumped out. They explained that they had seen something they just couldn't describe. I asked them if they got a good look at whatever had them so shook up. They looked at each other and said yes. They said they were driving through the country, on their way to join us, and were driving past a farm when they noticed something in the ditch. The friend who was driving said he flashed his brights to get a better look, and whatever it was raised up and ran across the road on all fours. It looked like it could walk on two legs if it wanted to, they both said. They also said it looked like it was half dog, half man, or maybe half dog and half monkey. They couldn't explain how the creature looked any better than that. They just kept trying to compare it to other animals. They said they were about 20 yards from it, and the brights were on, and they got a good look at it. Well, that's that story, and I'll never forget how stricken their faces were with panic and fear. I don't think they were lying. It was July 2004, and three of my friends and I were out in a field just having a good old time messing around. That's when we heard some noises off in a field a couple 100 yards away. We didn't think too much of it. A little while later, we kept hearing the noises get louder and louder. We could also hear trees breaking and things like that, so we tried to ignore it. But we soon found out that ignoring those sounds was a bad idea. We saw a creature that was 7 to 8 feet tall coming toward us. The creature stood like a human and acted as a human would, but it looked like a dog or a wolf. We were completely surprised, and we had no idea what was going on. We ran back to our cars as fast as we could and drove away. I'm a skeptic of the supernatural, but I believe anything is possible. I won't discount supernatural occurrences if I can't find a logical explanation for them. I've experienced a few incidents I could not explain, but I'm going to tell you about the one that freaked me out the most, though. So here it goes. I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, USA. A lot of people in the cities have cabins in either northern Minnesota or rural Wisconsin. Our cabin was in rural Wisconsin in a small town called Danbury. The cabin is on Long Lake, and at the very end of Long Lake Road. Along with the cabin came almost an acre of land covered by thick forest. We carved a trail through the land for ATVs and whatnot, so the scene is totally set. Now, about me. I'm an outdoor enthusiast and have been forever. I'm 6'4", fit, and have been a hunter since I was like 12. I know my environment, the wildlife, and the forest well, and I'm typically comfortable with the woods. I come from a military family and am trained in multiple forms of combat, armed and unarmed. I also have extensive firearms training, and as a result, I'm fairly confident in my ability to defend myself. I'm not really scared of people. Big predators, on the other hand, like bears, wolves, man, bear, pig, whatever, I'm not a big fan of. This brings me to the weirdness. So I'm 23 now, but at the time of the incident, I was only 16. Even at 16, I was a decent hunter and had good common sense. Anyway, I was at the cabin with my cousin and grandparents. It was the middle of the summer, I think July to be exact, because it was really hot. My cousin and I were shooting at each other with airsoft guns. We had a full-on battle going on throughout the property, including the woods, which were my stalking grounds. I was wearing my BDUs with face cover and all, as well as head-to-toe camo. Our battle ended up about 100 yards northwest of the cabin, into the woods. We ended the war on the main trail and were standing and talking about the events that transpired. I was still on guard because I always am. I suppose I could be considered a tad paranoid. Alright, so we were standing there talking when I noticed something move at our 12 o'clock, about 50 meters out. I got quiet and focused dead ahead, scanning. My cousin was still shaking, so I whispered, "Shh." So he shut up. I figured the movement I had just seen was a bird or something. As a joke and to freak him out, I told him we were being watched. That's when I noticed that the woods were dead quiet. No birds were chirping, there was no sounds, and that's when I started to think that this only happens when a big predator is around. So I started looking even closer, and that's when I saw it. At my 12 o'clock, there was this large animal. It had reddish brown fur and almost blended in perfectly until I focused in on it. It had long front limbs with what appeared to be formidable claws, and it was standing kind of like slouched down against a tree, like it was trying to be stealthy. Even though it was standing like that, it was nearly as tall as me. The only reason why I saw it was because of its teeth. I think it was panning because its whitish teeth were visible. Its snout appeared to be a tad elongated, and I couldn't get a better look because my first thought was, we have to go. I even said it out loud. My cousin was already freaked out, and when I said those words, he bolted up the trail towards the cabin. He nearly left me in the dust, because instead of running when he did, I waited a good 3 seconds, keeping my eye on it until I saw it move. That's when I ran like hell. I didn't even see which way it ran. All I know is that I heard it crashing through the woods. My cousin stopped at the shed, which was about 50 meters from the cabin, to wait for me. When I caught up, I yelled, "Go!" Gah. When I caught up, I yelled, "Go, go, go!" and we both bolted to the cabin. We got inside and shut the door. My grandma asked why we looked panicked and had slammed the door shut. I knew they wouldn't believe me, so I said that we had seen a bear, and my cousin had nodded. Later that night, after my grandparents went to sleep, we talked about it. I asked my cousin if he had seen it too. He told me that he had paused for a second to look back after he ran to see if I was running with him. He said that he had seen me still looking at it. He said that's when he saw it move and I run. He said he had mostly just seen a flash of fur. He went on to say he thought it wasn't the right color to be a bear. I also agreed that it wasn't the right color to be one and told him that we only had black bears in the area and that it wasn't built like a bear either. I told him I never thought it was a bear. He asked me why I lied about it to my grandparents. I told him they wouldn't have believed us. We've kept it between the two of us until now. Still, the animal didn't match any known regional animal profiles in the area. I'm at a loss for what it may have been. I do know it was stalking us through and that it was built like an athletic predator. Not quite like a bear. It wasn't heavy set as a bear would have been either. After the incident, neither of us would go into the woods on foot, alone or without a gun. We generally only went back in the woods on ATVs from that point. I always loved the cabin up until then. Fortunately, the cabin has been sold now. This is a difficult thing for me to write down on paper. I had no idea what a cryptid was until my son told me about his encounter just before it aired on YouTube. All these years, I have thought what I had seen was just a very deformed bear thing. Just so you know, I was driving that night and I never drink and drive. I was 100% sober. I haven't even talked about my encounter since it happened, until I told my son. Since then, I have told my best friend, and she encouraged me to contact several people on YouTube and get my word out. Most evenings, just about an hour before dark, some of us enjoyed going for deer rides. We had a route we would always use, and it started out on Rustic Road, which was southwest of our cabin on Long Lake, just south of Danbury. The route took us to a place that went through a wildlife preserve. Then we ended up on the road that goes from Hinckley, Minnesota to Danbury. The road through the preserve always made me uncomfortable because it was a swampy bog on both sides of the road. It was a narrow gravel road, and in order to turn around, you would need to go down a very narrow drive to a parking area for hunters. I had only been in one of those parking areas once, and it creeped me out. We never saw deer on that road, so we typically went fast in that area. We would have avoided that gravel road altogether, but we always saw deer just before the preserve and just after. On this evening, it was just my sister-in-law and I that went on the deer ride. This happened 15 or 16 years ago, so we did not have cell phones. Sometimes we would take cameras to take pictures of deer. This night, we didn't have a camera with us at all. It was a hot night, and we had our windows down because the air conditioner wasn't working at all. I was driving a large car, a 1998 Cadillac to be exact. We had just started down that creepy road when we noticed something black on the road, about a half mile ahead of us to be exact. We were driving pretty fast, but as we got closer, it appeared to be a dark gray in color. It also appeared to have an elongated muzzle, and it had its back to us, but it was a little sideways, so we could tell it was eating something in the road. I stopped the car and just kept my foot on the brake. This animal had very wide, muscular shoulders, and its fur was longer than a bear's. Its ears were pointy, like a German shepherd's, and stood straight up on top of its head. This animal had hands, and it was holding a dead rabbit, I think. I was talking to Amy, and I said, "What is that?" I think I was verbalizing every thought that came into my head. I was totally freaked out, and the animal noticed us. It started to turn its head, and that's when I turned on my headlights. It wasn't dark yet, but I wanted to see this thing better. It turned and faced my car. The headlights caught its eyes, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Its eyes glowed reddish-orange in the headlights. I freaked. To me, this creature was demonic in nature. And then it stood up straight on its back legs. And as this thing moved, it was jerky, like it wasn't comfortable in its own skin. It was not a natural movement. The animal sprinted at my car. It took at least 6 steps. I gunned my car right at it. I was in a panic. I was terrified. It turned right, and still upright, then dropped to all fours. Its legs had an odd bend in them, like backwards knees, and I just screamed, What is that?" It ran into the swamp, and I got the hell out of there. We stopped on the road to our cabin, but then it was dark. When we were stopped, Amy and I both cried. We couldn't stop shaking. We talked about what we had just seen. We both agreed that we would tell people we had seen a bear. To be honest, at the time, I honestly thought it was a deformed bear. Today, I know it was not, and I am no longer in denial. What I saw, I cannot understand or explain. It was just plain evil in nature, and wrong by about every account. So, this encounter of mine happened many years ago when I was 15 years old. I only recently started reading information on the internet describing this creature and now have a desire to tell my story. This encounter happened at my grandparents' lake cabin, south of the town of Danbury, Wisconsin, east of Highway 35 around Devil's Lake. My background has always been the great outdoors, playing and exploring in the woods. During this time period, I was very comfortable going out by myself, for all-day adventures to be exact. On the night of this encounter, I had gone to sleep around 10 p.m., and it was in the summer, so no school. The night was warm, so I had the bedroom windows slightly cracked for some air circulation, and to hear the crickets and outside noises. This always would put me to sleep every time because, like I said earlier, I was very comfortable in the woods and nothing was out of the ordinary that night. Now at the time, my grandparents' bedroom was on the other side of the cabin. They also had a black Labrador retriever that always slept in my room most of the time, and this fact will come into the story later on. I had fallen asleep like I always did at the cabin. Hours later, I never knew exactly what time it was, but it was late and everyone else was asleep. I suddenly awoke feeling something was wrong. Being still groggy, the first thing I noticed was that nothing outside was making any noise at all. No crickets, frogs, whippoorwills, nothing. Just total silence. I held my breath for a minute, listening very intently, thinking that was very odd. I moved my head to see the door of the bedroom. The nightlight from the hallway was giving a slight glow, and I could see that my grandparents' dog was not laying in his normal spot on the floor, or any place in my room. I guess maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed, and then I heard it. A sound that to me sounded like a raccoon or some other animal scratching the outside of the cabin. This continued, and my mind wondered what the heck could have been making that noise. It was still totally silent, except that scratching noise that began to move down the wall, closer to the window of the bedroom. So I turned my attention to the window. It was very dark outside, but I could still make out the slight silhouette of the trees and the branches up high. All at once, the scratching stopped, and I strained to adjust my eyes, and that's when it stepped out of the shadows and blocked out the view of the trees. It was huge. No animal I knew or could envision was standing in my view, and I couldn't make out any features of its body, but I could see the distinct ears of a canine on a large head. Then I saw its eyes and was paralyzed with fear. It was hunched down looking in the window. Its eyes were a glowing amber color and blinked every 10 to 15 seconds. My mind was racing. Can it see me? What's it gonna do? What am I going to do? A chill went down my spine. I could hear it breathing. It let out an exhale that was deep, but not overly loud, and then it began to sniff the air. I could hear it clearly, only being around 10 to 12 feet away from it. About 30 seconds elapsed, which felt like forever to me, but looking back, it was not much time at all. The creature then began to show its teeth, almost like a grin of satisfaction that it had scared me so badly. Time stood still, and then it stood up, off its haunches, erect like a man, and walked off, away from the window, in the direction of the lake. I knew this was my chance, so I jumped out of bed into the hallway, away from the window, and began to breathe heavy, because I think I held my breath for over 2 minutes. I looked into the living room and could see the dog totally standing still, in a rigid posture, hair standing on end with a slight growl, looking at the deck window. I turned to the hall closet and grabbed my 20-gauge shotgun and loaded it. It was only a single shot, but it was better than nothing. I thought to myself while I was trying to catch my breath. And then I realized, if it wanted to come into the house, it could easily do it by breaking the glass on the deck patio. And if it did that, I had no place to go, because I was trapped in between my bedroom and that patio window to my grandparents' room, where my grandfather had a deer rifle that I couldn't get to. So I stood, waiting for around 5 minutes, and nothing happened. The dog seemed to calm down and walked over to me and sat down, wanting to get his head scratched. I thought about waking up my grandparents and telling them what I had seen, but at the time I didn't think that they would believe me. And after all, I couldn't believe it myself. So I calmed down and went back into my bedroom, pulled the covers off the bed, and slept on the floor with the gun and dog, at the ready, and half asleep for the rest of the night. This encounter had me scared so bad that I didn't want to even get close to the window to close it at all that way that night, for fear of that thing might be coming back. I waited until dawn before, and I closed and locked it. Once daylight was in full force, I went outside to see if I could find any scratches on the wall or anything else, like even footprints. I didn't find anything at all, of course, and was starting to wonder if I was just going crazy. No, that was real. I continued to sleep on the floor for around a week before I felt it was okay to sleep in my bed again. But that window stayed closed and locked ever since. I didn't have any other encounters with the Dogman after that incident, and the memory was put out of my mind over time until very recently. I was reading encounters on the internet and saw that 2 other people had an encounter in the same area. And when I looked into their encounters, I decided to share my experience. You don't know what true primal fear is until you see one of these things and are face to face with one. I never want to experience that again. My wife and I were driving back to our cabin we have in the North Woods after visiting friends in town. It was a hot, muggy summer night, but it was cooling down fast, which made it start to get foggy. The road went about a half mile through a spruce bog and then up a hill to where a farm field was on the right. Hardwoods were on the left. I was in my mid-50s at the time and did not believe in things like that we were about to see. Out of the fog from the farm field, going from right to left, came a creature. The creature was about 8 to 10 feet off the ground, and the best way to describe what we saw would be to say that it looked like a person who had jumped off a trampoline and took off with their arms stretched out in front of them, with their legs bent. It was upright, however, and was covered all over with fur. It was not a coyote or wolf, but looked like a cross between a man and some kind of canine. It had pointy ears and a long snout. My wife later said that the head reminded her of the ancient Egyptian god with a dog head. It landed flat on its feet directly in front of my wife's van, no more than 20 feet away. The craziest thing is it landed and jumped like a kangaroo, flying back off into the fog. Its arms were still sticking straight out in front of it. It did not act or look like any canine we know of. We had been going slowly because of the fog, and as soon as she saw that thing, she stopped the van. We just kind of looked at each other like, did we really see that? However, we did see it, and it still freaks us out. Another weird thing is we both felt that it was not of this world. It did not move naturally, and that was just the feeling we got. We don't tell many people about what we saw because the people we have told don't believe or want to believe we saw what we did. However, I did tell a good friend of mine who didn't laugh because he said that when he was a little kid, his father, who was a logger, used to tell him about loggers in the woods seeing dogman-like beings. I'm so glad I found this, and I see other rational people having similar encounters. Like some others, I was with someone who witnessed it too. It must be really difficult for someone who sees one of these things by themselves to try and explain to others what they had seen and even try to justify it. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, or maybe 11. I'm just about to turn 20, but I'll never forget what happened that day. I was at my grandparents' house, who were watching me for the day. They live out in a mixture of farmlands and woods in rural Wisconsin. Their yard is mostly surrounded by farmland, but to the right side of the yard is a couple acres of woods and swamp. It was a really hot, muggy morning in July. I was standing out on the deck, shooting at some cans with my BB gun. All of a sudden, I got this sense something was wrong. It felt like I was being watched. I started scanning the tree line immediately, and down at the edge of the trees, about 60 yards away, by the swamp and woods, was this thing, standing that I can only describe as a dogman. It was about 7 feet tall, covered with shaggy gray hair, and had the classic dogman face, which long snout, pointed ears on top of its head, yellow eyes, and it was very muscular. It was standing on 2 legs, but it appeared to be sort of leaning up against a tree, I think. We locked eyes, and while it was probably only 10 seconds, it felt like hours. It sounds silly, but I felt the thing had a sinister grin on its face. It was extremely intimidating. I know that thing had wanted to kill me, and it easily could have done that. I could relive this encounter at my age now with a shotgun instead of a BB gun, and I'd still be just as terrified. It definitely had a very negative and sinister vibe to it. After locking eyes with the thing, it just bolted off on 2 legs through some of the swamp and emerged further down the tree line, and then ran off into the forest. At first, I thought it might have been one of my older cousins playing a joke on me, who lived nearby, but then I realized that there was no way they could be wearing a suit, be 7 feet tall, and clear the swamp as fast as this thing did. I wasn't going to tell my grandma and grandpa that I saw a werewolf down by the swamp. They would never believe me. So I just kept my mouth shut and tried to carry on with my day. Well, later that afternoon, I was talking to my aunt, and she brought up the fact that she had heard strange noises the night before. When I asked what they sounded like, she said it was a lot like snarling and growling, and it kind of sounded like an animal being attacked.